Hello and welcome back to Sci-Fi Stories. We are so incredibly grateful for your continued support of our channel. Unfortunately, YouTube has disabled our monetization features, and we currently have zero budget to keep operating. If you enjoy our story today, we kindly ask that you consider supporting us with just $1, so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and keep creating these stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or comments below. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Bo Barrera threw her weight against the heavy bulkhead door, her muscles screaming in absolute agony. The dark, claustrophobic corridors of the Zenith space station seemed to crush inward around her, the metal groaning a terrifying symphony of destruction. Beneath her boots, the deck plates vibrated violently. The station's decaying orbit was dragging it relentlessly deeper into the immense gravity well of the gas giant below, the massive planet pulling the ruined structure apart piece by piece. But the dying station was not the most immediate threat. Something else was hunting her. A massive biomechanical hunting machine crashed through the reinforced steel barrier behind her as if it were made of fragile glass. Its primary programming had fractured horribly 18 months ago, twisting a heavy-duty maintenance drone into a relentless, bloodthirsty predator. Huge, razor-sharp metal limbs clawed at the bulkheads, ripping thick armored panels away as the beast surged down the narrow corridor with terrifying, unnatural speed. Its twin red optical sensors sliced through the absolute darkness, painting the walls with a bloody hue as it hunted for Bo's thermal signature. Bo gripped her only weapon tightly in her right hand. It was a jagged, incredibly sharp metal rod she had scavenged from the twisted wreckage of the primary command module. Her hands shook violently. 18 months had passed since the horrific orbital accident had claimed the lives of her entire crew. 18 months of solitary, desperate survival, rationing stale water, and hunting for scraps of breathable air, had drained every single ounce of her physical and mental strength. She stumbled forward, her heavy magnetic boots slipping on the fluid-slicked grated floor. Her breath rasped painfully inside her helmet, each gasp burning her lungs. The biomechanical nightmare let out a deafening, metallic shriek that reverberated through the tight space. It leaped into the air, its massive, terrifying shadow entirely engulfing her small frame. "To your left. Drop and roll to your left." A voice rang out, slicing through the chaotic noise of the chase. It was crisp, urgent, and undeniably the voice of a young little girl. The sound echoed down from an overhead air ventilation shaft, completely impossible yet absolutely real. "Its right optical array is damaged," the young voice commanded with startling authority. "It has a large blind spot right beneath its main chassis. Go right now." Bo did not have the luxury of hesitation or doubt. She threw her battered body violently to the left, tumbling across the hard deck just as the machine's heavy razor claws slammed into the metal grating exactly where she had been standing a fraction of a second before. Sparks rained down like blinding firecrackers, trusting the phantom voice of the child. Bo scrambled frantically beneath the massive, writhing bulk of the monstrous beast. The heat radiating from its underside was blistering, threatening to melt her suit. Looking up, she spotted the pulsating, exposed blue light of its primary energy core. With a raw, guttural cry forged from 18 months of pure survival instinct, Bo drove the jagged metal rod upward with every last fraction of her fading strength. The sharp metal pierced the protective casing and plunged deep into the core. A concussive shockwave of blue energy violently threw Bo backward across the corridor. The massive machine convulsed wildly, its metal joints shrieking as the core exploded inward. Then, with a heavy, final crash, it went completely dead. Bo hit the opposite wall hard and slid down to the freezing floor. She tried to command her legs to stand, but her body simply refused. A shrill, Continuous warning alarm began shrieking inside her helmet. The violent impact had torn a wide, jagged gash right across the central chest plate of her spacesuit. Precious oxygen was rushing out into the toxic, sub-zero atmosphere of the ruined corridor. She clutched the tear desperately with both gloved hands, gasping frantically for air that was rapidly vanishing. The edges of her vision turned a deep, suffocating black. Death was finally here. Out of the encroaching darkness, a silhouette emerged. It was a woman, but unlike any human Bo had ever seen before. The stranger's flawless skin emitted a faint, ethereal, bioluminescent glow, illuminating the deep shadows with a soft, calming azure light. A brilliant, intricate neural network pulsed visibly beneath her translucent skin, glowing brighter as she moved with fluid, silent grace. The space-mutated woman reached down. Her movements were gentle, yet possessing impossible strength, as she grabbed Bo and dragged her limp body through a heavily concealed hatchway, pulling her deep into a fully air-sealed hidden sanctuary. The heavy pressure door slammed and locked shut behind them. Clean, breathable air hissed violently into the small, illuminated chamber. Bo managed to rip her shattered helmet off, drawing in ragged, burning breaths that felt like pure liquid life. She lay flat on her back on the smooth floor, her vision swimming wildly, hovering precariously on the very edge of total unconsciousness. Above her, a small face suddenly leaned into view. It was a little girl with bright, incredibly inquisitive eyes and messy hair. The girl looked down at Bo, her expression intensely serious and completely unfazed by the life and death struggle that had just occurred. "Are you lonely?" the little girl named Lyra asked, her clear voice echoing softly in the quiet room. "Then you should marry my mom. She is the kindest person in the entire world." Bo stared up at the child, the absolute absurdity and shocking innocence of the question freezing her exhausted mind. Before she could even attempt to process the words, the overwhelming darkness finally claimed her, and Bo slipped away into total unconsciousness. Soft emerald light filtered through the translucent leaves of massive, overgrown ferns. Bo opened her eyes slowly. The air here was rich, heavy with the scent of damp soil and blooming flora, a stark contrast to the sterile, blood-scented metallic corridors of the dying station. She lay on a bed of woven moss-like fibers. Panic flared briefly as she remembered the tearing of her suit and the violent escape. But as she reached for her chest, her fingers met smooth, unbroken skin. Where the jagged metal had ripped through her flesh, a web of glowing azure biological tissue now pulsed in perfect rhythm with her heartbeat. The fatal wounds had been completely healed by an intricate, alien biotechnology. "You are safe now." The voice did not come from the air, but bloomed softly inside her mind. Bo turned her head to see Kaylin sitting beside the bed. The space-mutated woman radiated a gentle, soothing luminescence. Kaylin reached out, her cool, glowing fingers gently touching Bo's forehead. A cascade of vivid, telepathic imagery flooded Bo's consciousness. She saw generations of humans trapped on the Zenith station long ago, forced to adapt to leaking radiation and failing life support. She saw their bodies shifting over decades, their nervous systems intertwining with the station's bioengineered plant life to survive the incredibly harsh environment. Kaylin looked at Bo with profound, tender empathy, her silent thoughts wrapping around Bo's exhausted mind like a warm blanket. "My mom used her own energy vines to fix your broken parts," a bright voice chimed in. Lyra climbed onto the edge of the woven bed, her eyes wide with unblinking curiosity. The little girl practically glued herself to Bo's side. As Kaylin stepped away to prepare a cup of glowing nutrient-rich nectar, Lyra leaned in close. The girl whispered that her mother's glowing light used to be much brighter. 4 years ago, a massive material storage silo collapsed in the lower decks. Lyra's father had been trapped beneath the heavy titanium beams. He had pushed Lyra to safety just before the structure gave way completely. Lyra explained that, since that terrible day, Kaylin had locked her heart away, her beautiful light dimming beneath layers of profound grief and invisible emotional scars. Hearing the child's painful memories broke something open inside Bo. Holding the warm cup of nectar, Bo looked at Kaylin and finally spoke. Her voice was raspy from disuse, but the words poured out uncontrollably. She told them about her life before the disaster as an astrophysical engineer. She described the horrific accident that had violently torn her entire crew apart in the cold void of space. For 18 long months, she had wandered the dark, freezing metal tombs of the station, hunting for scraps of food and fighting off the creeping madness of total isolation. Bo confessed that the loneliness was a physical weight, a dark monster chewing away at her sanity every single day. As she spoke, Kaylin sat beside her, gently taking Bo's scarred, dirty hand into her own glowing, pristine hands, offering a silent, deep understanding between two souls who had lost everything in the vast, uncaring universe. Over the next 3 days, their bond deepened naturally. The ecological zone's primary water filtration system began to fail, its pressure dropping by 40%. Bo offered to help, standing before the massive humming machine. Bo applied her rigorous knowledge of fluid dynamics and mechanical engineering to diagnose the blocked intake valves. However, the system had been modified over generations with living, organic filters. That was where Kaylin stepped in. While Bo rerouted the electrical pathways, Kaylin used her bioluminescent neural network to communicate with the living filters, coaxing the clogged organic membranes to open. Their collaboration was a flawless, beautiful dance. Bo's hard science and Kaylin's intuitive biological connection created an incredible synergy. Every time their shoulders brushed, or their hands met over a tangle of wires and vines, a spark of pure, quiet electricity passed between them, healing their shattered hearts piece by piece. On the morning of the 4th day, the atmosphere shifted. The Council of Elders, a group of 5 deeply glowing, ancient beings, summoned Bo to the central grove. They sat in a semicircle beneath a massive, glowing willow tree. Through a synchronized telepathic projection, the elders acknowledged Bo's contribution to the water system and offered her a permanent place within their hidden community. However, there was one strict condition: to protect the fragile secrecy of their tribe. Any outsider must completely bind their fate to the community through a sacred family bonding ritual. They demanded absolute loyalty. Bo stood before the imposing elders, feeling the immense weight of the crossroads before her. She could refuse and be cast back out into the dark, freezing, machine-infested corridors to face certain death alone. Or she could embrace this miraculous second chance. She turned her head and saw Kaylin standing by the edge of the grove, her eyes filled with a vulnerable, desperate hope. Beside Kaylin, little Lyra was waving frantically, mouthing the word "Mom" with a huge missing tooth smile. The terrifying void of space had taken everything from Bo. But here, in the heart of a dying station, the universe had unexpectedly offered her a home. Taking a deep breath, Bo looked back at the elders and nodded. She was ready to leave her loneliness behind forever. She chose Kaylin's sincere, radiant affection. She chose Lyra. She chose to be a mother and a wife. The integration into the hidden society was a slow and mesmerizing process. Bo spent hours each cycle sitting cross-legged with Kaylin, their palms pressed firmly together under the canopy of bioluminescent moss. Bo was learning to speak the silent, intricate language of the biological neural network. It started as a faint, electrical tingling beneath her skin, but soon blossomed into vivid cascades of shared emotion and imagery. Through this profound telepathic link, Bo explored the vast, beautifully complex landscapes of Kalen's mind. She felt the heavy, agonizing weight of the sorrow Kalen carried from losing her past. But more importantly, Bo witnessed the extraordinary, resilient inner strength that had kept the glowing woman from breaking entirely. Their minds danced around each other in the quiet dark, unraveling deep secrets that verbal words could never accurately convey. As the days melted into one another, their bond transcended the boundaries of their different biological origins. What began as mutual gratitude quickly ignited into a fierce, deeply rooted love. Bo fell entirely for Kalen's gentle grace and fierce protectiveness, while Kalen found an unshakable anchor in Bo's sharp, calculating, and resilient human spirit. They operated with an absolute, unspoken respect for the unique capabilities the other possessed. Meanwhile, Lyra thrived in this new environment of warmth and security. The little girl paraded through the glowing, overgrown groves, proudly declaring to anyone who would listen that she was the luckiest child alive, because she had the two greatest mothers in the entire universe. Recognizing the child's immense potential, Bo began teaching her the complex principles of quantum physics and orbital mechanics. To Bo's utter astonishment, Lyra absorbed the advanced scientific concepts with a terrifyingly brilliant innate genius, effortlessly blending the hard human mathematics with her own intuitive biological understanding of the universe. But beneath the tranquil surface of their newfound paradise, a sinister clock was ticking louder every second, driven by a lingering need to understand their exact position. Bo began taking covert excursions deeper into the station's abandoned, rotting core, navigating the treacherous, deteriorating maintenance shafts. Tapping into a partially functioning main terminal, she initiated a full diagnostic scan of the station's trajectory. The results that scrolled across the cracked, glowing monitor froze the blood in her veins. The calculations she had made during her lonely months of isolation were horribly wrong. The gravitational pull of the massive gas giant below was increasing exponentially. Zenith's orbit was decaying at a catastrophic, heavily accelerated rate. According to the raw telemetry data flashing in bright red text, the entire orbital station would plunge into the crushing atmospheric pressure of the gas planet in less than 30 days. They did not have years. They barely had 4 weeks. Desperation drove Bo to dig frantically through the heavily encrypted, restricted archival files of the station's original schematics. Buried deep beneath layers of corrupted security protocols, she finally found a ghost file. It was a heavily classified blueprint detailing a massive, heavily armored colonial lifeboat designated as the Ark. The colossal vessel was safely docked in the deepest, most heavily fortified sublevel of the Zenith structure. It had the capacity to carry the entire surviving ecosystem to safety. However, the launch mechanism was incredibly complex. The ship's primary engines required an original, unmodified human biometric access code to bypass the strict military lockdown. Simultaneously, it demanded a vast biological navigation network to plot a secure course out of the gas giant's deadly, unpredictable magnetic storms. Bo realized instantly that only a perfect synchronization between her human DNA and Kalen's advanced biological neural network could wake the dormant giant. Unknown to Bo, her unauthorized access to the core terminal had triggered a faint power surge, alerting a dangerous faction within the mutated tribe. There existed a shadow group of radical zealots who worshipped the terrifying gas giant below as a divine, hungry deity. They firmly believed that the impending collapse of the space station was a sacred cosmic cleansing, an unavoidable and beautiful return to the universal source. To them, attempting to escape the destruction of Zenith was a supreme act of blasphemy. The fanatics quickly identified Bo as a severe threat to their apocalyptic theology. They discovered her frantic research and realized she was piecing together an escape plan that would deny their dark god its ultimate sacrifice. Moving like silent phantoms through the damp, overgrown utility tunnels, the cultists bypassed the outer perimeter of Kalen's secluded family dwelling. They did not strike with weapons or loud violence. Instead, they employed a far more insidious and terrifying method. Using highly acidic spores, harvested from the toxic lower decks, they systematically melted through the primary air circulation vents, feeding oxygen directly into the family's sleeping quarters. The sabotage was designed to be agonizingly slow, completely quiet, and totally untraceable. As the deadly, suffocating carbon dioxide levels began to rise steadily in the enclosed space, the air grew thick and dangerously heavy. The invisible net of death was closing tightly around Bo, Kalen, and little Lyra, threatening to extinguish their bright new world before the real battle for survival could even begin. The grand family bonding ceremony took place in the very heart of the Central Arboretum, an immense subterranean cavern that the mutated tribe had transformed into a breathtaking, living cathedral of light. Thousands of ancient, bioluminescent vines cascaded from the vaulted metallic ceiling, bathing the wide-open space in radiant, shifting shades of sapphire and gold. The Council of Elders stood in a perfect semicircle around the altar of woven roots, their own internal light pulsing in a slow, reverent, and deeply ancient rhythm. Bo stood opposite Kalen, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. This rapid beating was not born from the terror she had known for 18 months, but from an overwhelming, profound sense of absolute belonging. Kalen looked utterly ethereal, her glowing neural network weaving intricate, hypnotic patterns of pure light across her flawless skin, perfectly matching the ceremonial garments woven from living silver threads. They reached out slowly, their palms meeting in the absolute center of the altar. Kalen gently extended her glowing fingertips, pressing them firmly against Bo's temples. Instantly, a torrential rush of pure, unadulterated warmth flooded every corner of Bo's mind. It was a tangible, electric transfer of life force and absolute devotion, a mental embrace so overwhelmingly profound that it completely shattered the final, icy remnants of Bo's long, agonizing isolation. Tears of pure joy welled up and spilled freely down Bo's cheeks. Lyra stepped forward, holding a small, perfectly woven ring of glowing flora. The little girl looked up at Bo, her large eyes shining with absolute joy and an unwavering certainty that grounded Bo's entire reality. "I love you, Mom," Lyra said, her young voice clear and ringing with absolute sincerity across the quiet cavern. Hearing that single, incredibly powerful word felt like a brilliant supernova exploding within Bo's chest. She dropped to her knees, right there on the mossy floor, pulling Lyra and Kalen into a fierce, desperate, and incredibly tight embrace. For the very first time in over 18 long, torturous months of fighting for scraps of breath and sanity, the crushing weight of the silent void was completely gone. She finally had a family. She was whole. But the universe, as Bo knew all too well, was a cruel and relentlessly unforgiving place. Just as the lead elder raised his hands to finalize the eternal biological bond, the heavy metal deck beneath their feet violently lurched. A deafening, catastrophic shockwave ripped through the delicate arboretum. The radical zealots had made their devastating move. Moving in total silence, they had rigged heavy explosive charges to the primary gravity bulkheads directly beneath the central plaza. The massive blast completely shattered the atmospheric containment field in a fraction of a second, unleashing an invisible, horrifying storm of sheer vacuum pressure that instantly swept through the once peaceful grove. The breathable air was violently sucked out of the enormous chamber, tearing the heavy, glowing vines from the ceiling and ripping the massive stone pedestals entirely from their deep foundations. Absolute chaos erupted. Bo felt the terrifying, familiar, and icy grip of the cosmic void clawing violently at her lungs, pulling the oxygen straight from her blood. Debris flew through the rapidly darkening air like deadly, jagged shrapnel caught in a Category 5 hurricane. Reacting with pure, instinctive maternal desperation, Kaylin threw herself forward into the invisible storm. She aggressively channeled every single ounce of her immense biological energy, her glowing neural network flaring with a blinding, almost radioactive brilliance that hurt the eyes. A massive, impenetrable dome of solid biokinetic energy erupted from her small body, snapping violently into place around Bo and Lyra, just a fraction of a millisecond before the vacuum storm could tear them into pieces. The brilliant shield held back the crushing pressure and the barrage of flying metal. But the toll on Kaylin's physical form was utterly catastrophic. A massive, jagged, heavily rusted shard of reinforced titanium hull plating, hurled by the explosive decompression at supersonic speed, pierced straight through the outer, weakest edge of the bioenergy dome. It struck Kaylin with devastating, unstoppable force, impaling her right side. The glowing woman collapsed instantly to her knees, the brilliant, protective light of her shield flickering wildly and dangerously as her blood, glowing a dull, dying, sickly blue, spilled heavily onto the metal deck. The massive dome shattered into a million fading, useless sparks. "No!" Bo screamed, her raw voice tearing her throat apart as the station's automated atmospheric emergency systems finally slammed the massive secondary steel bulkheads shut, stabilizing the air pressure just enough to prevent immediate, agonizing suffocation for everyone left inside. The zealots immediately swarmed into the ruined grove, dropping down from the shattered ceiling panels and emerging from the dark, ruined archways like a plague of locusts. They were armed with heavy, kinetic military rifles, salvaged from the armory and crude, brutal melee weapons forged from jagged station wreckage. Profound grief and pure, white-hot fury ignited inside Bo's soul like a fusion engine. She was absolutely not going to lose her new family again. She rapidly unclipped the heavy-duty plasma cutting torch and the industrial magnetic repulsor unit from her sturdy engineering belt. As the first wave of screaming cultists lunged toward them with murderous intent, Bo activated the repulsor at maximum output. A massive, concentrated kinetic shockwave slammed brutally into the attackers, throwing 3 of them backward into the ruined stone walls with bone-crunching, sickening force. She spun smoothly on her heel, firing a blinding, incredibly hot beam from the plasma torch that instantly melted the kinetic rifles of 2 more advancing zealots, forcing them to retreat, screaming in agony as molten metal splashed across their heavy armor. Moving with ruthless, practiced engineering efficiency, Bo rapidly rewired the internal power cell of her plasma torch, slamming the exposed, sparking core directly into the conductive metal grating of the floor. She established a localized, incredibly high-voltage electrostatic barrier, creating a crackling, blinding wall of deadly blue lightning that completely sealed off the immediate stone alcove where Kaylin lay heavily bleeding. Any fanatic who stepped even 1 inch too close was violently thrown back by the lethal bone-shattering electrical discharge. Through the shimmering, crackling electrical barrier, Bo watched in absolute horror as the cult leader, a massive, terrifyingly mutated man heavily scarred by decades of radiation exposure, dragged the battered, bleeding Council of Elders to the absolute center of the ruined plaza. "The great cosmic cleansing absolutely cannot be stopped by anyone," the fanatic leader roared, his deeply unnatural voice echoing menacingly over the loud, crackling electricity. "We have seized the primary command nodes. We know of the blasphemous vessel hidden deep in the dark. We will march to the lowest level right now and completely detonate the Ark's primary fusion core. We will ensure that every single soul on this station descends into the eternal, fiery embrace of the gas giant below. They were going to completely destroy the absolute only way off the rapidly dying space station. Bo dropped heavily to her knees beside Kaylin. The glowing woman was gasping painfully for air, her once vibrant, beautiful light fading to a terrifyingly pale, barely visible flicker. The huge metal shard was lodged incredibly deep, too close to vital organs to safely remove. Lyra was sobbing uncontrollably, her small, trembling hands frantically pressing against her mother's horrific wound in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding. Bo knew with cold logic that she could not fight an entire army of zealots alone. Nor could they survive the impending nuclear destruction of the Ark. They had to reach the massive ship first. Directly behind them, hidden behind a recently collapsed section of the thick arboretum wall, was a narrow, heavily corroded thermal exhaust pipe that led directly down into the station's dark, suffocating underbelly. It was a perilous, incredibly tight route, but it was their absolutely only chance at survival. "Lyra, grab my belt right now and do not let go," Bo commanded, her voice hardened into unbreakable cold steel. With a massive, unnatural surge of adrenaline, Bo carefully hoisted Kaylin's limp, heavily bleeding body onto her own back. The physical weight was absolutely agonizing, threatening to break her spine. But the terrifying fear of losing her beloved wife gave her impossible strength. Bo kicked the rusted, heavy metal grate completely off the exhaust pipe and forced herself into the narrow, pitch-black, incredibly hot tunnel. Lyra scrambled in quickly, right behind them. The claustrophobic pipe was suffocatingly tight, smelling strongly of ancient grease, rust, and burning copper wires. As they crawled painfully deeper into the suffocating dark, the faint, terrifying sounds of the zealots, finally breaching the electrostatic barrier, echoed violently from above. The ultimate, desperate race for survival had just begun, a terrifying plunge toward the deepest, darkest level of the dying space station. The descent through the heavily corroded thermal exhaust pipe felt like crawling through the suffocating throat of a dying mechanical beast. Bo dragged her bleeding wife forward, millimeter by agonizing millimeter, her human muscles burning intensely with lactic acid, while Lyra pushed bravely from behind. When they finally tumbled out of the narrow ventilation shaft, they found themselves in the lowest, most heavily fortified engineering bay of the station. Before them stood the Ark. It was a colossal, breathtaking marvel of early colonial engineering, its massive hull forged from dense, black carbon silicate, completely dormant, but practically humming with latent, ancient power. The ship was the size of a small city, designed perfectly to carry tens of thousands of desperate souls across the galaxy. Bo sprinted to the primary access terminal, located beside the massive titanium launch bay doors. She hastily wiped her bloody hands on her torn suit and pressed her palm firmly against the biometric scanner. A harsh, aggressive red light swept over her trembling hand. A synthesized voice echoed coldly through the cavernous space, loudly declaring that the primary biometric sensors had been physically compromised. The heavy display screen flickered violently, revealing massive scorch marks and completely melted circuitry along the mainframe. The radical cultists had already been here several cycles ago, blindly smashing the delicate outer panels in their ignorant, destructive crusade. The system flatly rejected Bo's human DNA signature. The immense blast doors remained absolutely sealed tight. High above them, the entire ceiling groaned terribly. The sound was not merely loud. It was an apocalyptic, mournful shriek of bending titanium and snapping heavy support struts. The immense gravity well of the gas giant below was dragging Zenith into its final, inescapable death spiral. Bo looked at the environmental chronometer on her wrist display. They had exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes before the immense atmospheric pressure of the planet completely crushed the station into an unrecognizable ball of superheated scrap metal. The air around them was already growing dangerously thick and heavy, the artificial gravity fluctuating wildly, making their stomachs churn with sickening nausea. Kaylin coughed violently, a fresh wave of pale blue blood spilling heavily from the horrific wound in her side. She weakly pushed herself up against the freezing cold metal bulkhead, her bioluminescent skin flickering wildly like a dying candle caught in a heavy storm. She looked directly at the exposed, extremely high-voltage power lines running from the damaged terminal directly into the thick blast doors. "Bo," Kaylin whispered, her voice terribly weak but laced with an unyielding, terrifying resolve. "I can bypass the physical lock. I can weave my biological neural network directly into the raw electrical circuitry. I will force the manual override switch to open from the inside." Bo stared at her wife in pure, unadulterated horror. She fully understood the strict scientific logic behind that incredibly suicidal proposal. The Ark's massive doors required hundreds of thousands of volts to successfully disengage the heavy magnetic locks. "No, absolutely not!" Bo shouted, her voice breaking completely. "That level of raw electrical current will instantly vaporize your entire nervous system. It will fry your brain permanently. I just found you. I finally got my family. I absolutely refuse to lose you right now. If we do nothing at all, we all burn together in less than 3 hours." Kaylin pleaded softly, reaching out with a trembling, faintly glowing hand to touch Bo's dirty cheek. "Let me save our beautiful daughter. Let me save you." Bo shook her head frantically, hot tears cutting clean paths down her heavy, soot-stained face. She reached desperately for her plasma torch, fully prepared to spend her absolute last hour on Earth, trying to melt blindly through 10 feet of solid armor plating. "Wait, Mom!" Lyra yelled suddenly. The little girl ran swiftly to Bo's discarded, heavily damaged spacesuit, lying discarded on the metal floor. She pointed directly at the heavy-duty energy filtration unit, securely mounted on the lower back plate. "You taught me about quantum resistance and electrical buffering just last week," Lyra said rapidly, her incredibly young mind processing the terrifying, complex situation with absolute, chilling clarity. "The filter on your suit is specifically designed to handle massive solar radiation spikes. If we safely strip the main capacitor and hardwire it between Mom's biological neural pathways and the ship's main electrical grid, it can act as a massive shock absorber. It will step down the lethal voltage just enough to let her command the system without burning her completely to ash." Bo stared down at the child, her highly trained engineering brain instantly running the complex mathematical calculations. The logic was completely sound, but the margin for error was impossibly narrow. "I will have to manually sever the physical connection exactly 2 milliseconds after the lock fully disengages," Bo said, her bloody hands already flying over her spacesuit, ripping the heavy capacitor violently out of its reinforced housing with frantic, desperate strength. "If I am late by even a tiny fraction of a single second, the electrical feedback loop will absolutely kill her." "Do it," Kaylin commanded softly, crawling painfully toward the violently sparking power lines. Bo rapidly stripped the thick rubber casing from the heavy cables, her fingers bleeding freely as she carefully spliced the cold copper wires directly into Kaylin's glowing biological tendrils, placing the bulky suit capacitor securely in the middle of the highly lethal circuit. "Hold on to me," Kaylin whispered quietly, closing her eyes. The exact moment the final physical connection was made, a terrifying, blinding arc of pure white electricity violently surged from the ship's grid directly into Kaylin's fragile body. The glowing woman screamed, a horrific sound of absolute, unimaginable physical agony that tore viciously at Bo's soul. Kalen's entire biological network flared with a blinding radioactive intensity, fully illuminating the massive dark cavern as she desperately commanded the ancient machine. Bo watched the heavy locking mechanism intensely, her hand gripping the heavy physical cutoff switch, strictly counting the terrifying milliseconds inside her head. The massive titanium gears hidden inside the door shrieked in violent protest. The heavy magnetic seals finally gave way with a deafening boom. Bo slammed her fist down incredibly hard on the cutoff switch. The blinding light instantly vanished. Kalen collapsed heavily to the floor, her body smoking, completely unresponsive, but her chest was still barely rising and falling. The massive arc doors slowly hissed open, fully revealing the pristine, fully lit boarding ramp safely waiting inside. They had finally done it. But before Bo could even reach down to safely pick up her unconscious wife, a massive, terrifying shadow completely blocked the entrance to the bay. The cult leader stepped aggressively out from behind a pile of ruined cargo containers. He was not alone. He was heavily strapped inside a stolen industrial demolition machine. The enormous, mechanical suit was heavily armored and armed with a highly illegal, shoulder-mounted gravity distortion cannon. The fanatic leader looked down at them with absolute burning hatred. "You will absolutely not deny the great cosmic cleansing," he roared loudly over the mechanical whine of his towering machine. He bypassed Bo entirely and swung the massive barrel of the gravity cannon directly toward Lyra. The highly destructive weapon began emitting a low, terrifying hum as it rapidly charged, quickly preparing to fire a concentrated ball of crushing gravitational force that would instantly flatten the little girl into a bloody stain on the heavy deck. Bo lunged desperately forward, screaming Lyra's name loudly, but she was entirely too far away. Lyra did not run away. She did not even flinch. She boldly stood her ground, her small hands raised firmly in front of her. Throughout their brief journey together, Bo had strictly taught her the complex mathematical equations of gravitational fields, and Kalen had genetically passed down the biological ability to mentally interface with raw energy frequencies. The little girl perfectly combined them in one single, explosive moment of pure genius. Instead of pushing helplessly against the weapon's immense physical power, Lyra reached out swiftly with her highly evolved mind and grabbed the exact energetic frequency of the charging cannon. Flawlessly applying the complex quantum inversion formula Bo had written on a scrap of metal days ago, Lyra violently reversed the weapon's magnetic polarity right at the exact second the cult leader arrogantly pulled the heavy firing trigger. The massive weapon did not fire forward. Instead, the heavy gravity cannon violently imploded, a terrifying, ultra-dense sphere of dark, swirling gravitational energy suddenly erupted backward, entirely engulfing the huge mechanical suit and its screaming pilot. The cult leader screamed in absolute, sheer terror as his massive machine was instantly crushed brutally into a sphere no larger than a small melon. The dark gravity field quickly solidified completely, securely locking the radical fanatic inside a permanent, inescapable heavy prison of his own dark creation, leaving absolutely nothing but a heavy, silent metal ball clattering uselessly against the freezing floor. The immense floor of the engineering bay finally gave way. Massive, continent-sized chunks of the Zenith space station began tearing completely free, sucked violently out into the infinite, freezing void of space. The cavernous hangar containing the Ark shuddered with apocalyptic force, its reinforced walls groaning as they warped inward. The terrifying roar of structural death echoed everywhere. Bo did not look back at the crushed remnants of their enemy. She hoisted Kalen firmly into her arms, ignoring the agonizing burn in her own muscles, and screamed for Lyra to run. The three of them raced up the brilliantly illuminated boarding ramp just as a massive section of the ceiling collapsed, flattening the space where they had stood just 1 second prior. They burst into the Ark's enormous, pristine cockpit. Bo securely strapped Kalen and Lyra into the heavy, shock-absorbing safety seats. She threw herself into the primary command chair and slammed her bloody hands onto the crystalline control console. The ancient ship instantly recognized her human biometrics this time, flooding the massive bridge with glowing golden interfaces. But the brief surge of hope died instantly. A blaring warning siren filled the cabin. The ship's primary artificial intelligence core was completely dead, hopelessly corrupted by decades of radiation decay. The Ark possessed the immense engine power required to escape, but without the core navigation system calculating the impossibly complex quantum escape vectors. The ship could not steer itself out of the gas giant's crushing gravitational grip. They were blind, trapped in a vehicle capable of miracles, but completely paralyzed. Outside the thick viewport, the turbulent, fiery atmosphere of the gas planet rose up to swallow them whole. Bo looked over at Kalen, whose chest was barely rising. She looked at Lyra, who was staring back with absolute, unwavering trust. Bo knew exactly what had to be done. The only computer powerful enough to calculate the quantum escape route was the combined power of a highly trained human engineering mind and a profoundly evolved biological neural network. Bo reached under the command console and violently ripped out the primary neural interface cables. She pressed the glowing, cold metal connectors directly against her own temples. Then, she reached across the space between the seats and firmly grasped Kalen's glowing hand, forcibly intertwining her fingers with her dying wife's bioluminescent vines. "Wake up, my love," Bo screamed, pouring every single ounce of her life force and absolute devotion into that physical connection. "I need you to fly with me right now." The reaction was instantaneous and entirely explosive. A blinding wave of pure, unified consciousness completely obliterated Bo's physical senses. She was no longer just Bo Barrera, human engineer. She was inextricably woven into Kalen's soul. Flesh, alien biology, and ancient quantum machinery perfectly fused into one single, unprecedented entity. Bo's mind provided the rigid, absolute laws of quantum mechanics, while Kalen's biological network provided the fluid, intuitive map of the universe. Together, their unified mind expanded outward, transcending the physical boundaries of space and time. They could actually see the invisible, swirling currents of gravity. With a mere thought, the merged entity sent the flawless launch command directly to the Ark's massive fusion engines. Just as the entire Zenith station finally plummeted into the crushing, superheated atmospheric layers of the gas giant, disintegrating instantly into billions of burning ashes, the Ark's massive thrusters ignited. A blinding pillar of blue fire erupted from the stern, propelling the colossal ship forward with unbelievable, terrifying speed. The Ark shattered the violent atmospheric waves, perfectly threading the needle through the deadly magnetic storms, and violently tore itself entirely free from the planet's deadly gravity well. The great ship shot flawlessly into the absolute, peaceful stillness of deep space. Deep within the heavily armored passenger bays, thousands of stasis pods hummed to life. Hours earlier, during her frantic research, Bo had secretly rerouted the station's emergency short-range teleportation grid, automatically beaming the surviving members of the mutated tribe safely aboard the Ark the moment the station's gravity failed. They had saved absolutely everyone. 7 months later, the sky was a breathtaking canvas of lavender and gold. Bo stood on a grassy hill, overlooking a vast, incredibly pristine alien valley. The air was warm, sweet, and perfectly breathable. A few yards away, Lyra was laughing brightly, completely covered in dirt as she expertly assembled a miniature fusion energy device, using salvaged parts and glowing local flora. Soft, familiar footsteps rustled the tall grass behind Bo. Gentle arms wrapped securely around her waist, and Kalen rested her chin comfortably on Bo's shoulder. Kalen's skin glowed with a vibrant, perfectly healthy azure light, completely healed from the horrors of the past. "Are you lonely?" Kaylin whispered softly into Beau's ear. A playful, loving echo of the very first question Lyra had ever asked her in the dark. Beau leaned her head back against Kaylin's shoulder, taking a deep, entirely peaceful breath. She looked at the beautiful alien sunrise, then down at their brilliant, amazing daughter playing in the grass. "Never again," Beau replied, her voice thick with pure, overwhelming emotion. "My loneliness is gone forever. I found the absolute greatest family in the entire universe." Thank you so much for listening to our story today. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please let us know in the comments section. If you enjoyed our story today, we kindly ask that you consider supporting us with just $1. Your generosity allows us to pay our hardworking team, helping them provide for their families and giving us the budget to continue creating better stories to serve you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or comments of this video. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts.